what's the role of sleep in mental health, particularly with adults?
There is a strong correlation between anxiety and depression. It used to always be the thinking that the mental health problem caused the sleep problem, but now we're seeing that that's not necessarily the case and often isn't the case, that the sleep problem leads to the mental health problem. If you've had chronic sleep problems all that time, that's often when it hits. So everything then falls apart. Your whole world falls apart. Naps are proven to be pretty helpful with helping you gain a little bit of energy when you're lacking it. You have to look at nap from the perspective of sleep pressure. So if your nap's more than 15 or 20 minutes long and you get into a deep sleep, you knock off your sleep pressure, which means that when you go to sleep that night, you may develop some sleep onset insomnia, so you can't fall asleep. And that happens for kids as well.
Morning and welcome to Ultra Habits. How are you going?
I'm very well, Jay. Thank you for having me on the show. It's so exciting.
Yeah, of course. And how timely this show, where we're going to be diving into children's sleep as well as adults as well. I think it's going to be important. But, given what I've been recently going through and what a lot of the executive community I know is going through, particularly young parents, how the hell do we sleep when we have kids? That's the question that we're all try to answer. So before I dive into the questions, Deb, can you just walk us through how you actually took the journey down this path?
Well, my journey is probably a little different to many. I mean, everybody's journey is different, but mine's quite a little extreme. I decided to have my third baby after a 21-year gap. And that baby turned out to be my problem sleeper. But before I even realized I had a problem sleeper, I decided I wanted to homeschool this kid. In order to learn some stuff that I thought was really essential to, children's education, I decided to learn music. And in my that coincided with his first birthday. And in that first year, we struggled with lots of sleep. And then he came good for a short while, and then everything went bad again as a toddler. And in that first year, I just bought a keyboard and played at home. And then I decided that I would take music lessons, because the reason was because I thought if I had some sort of musical background, I could help him when he got to school age with music. And it turned out that struggling with all these sleep issues, I composed a lullaby that was a game changer for us. So a little different from probably most people's journeys. Having never done music at all.
How was it an actual game changer?
It's very different from any music, and we know music has such great value for the mind. That connection that it made with a toddler, and then being able to help that child calm down and sleep, because we need to be calm to go to sleep, and we need to have a calm environment to go to sleep. Just became a tool that we used that helped him. And then when I started trialing it on other aged kids, it did the same thing. So last year, it's been out for more than 10 years, but last year I decided to stream it, and we're just about to hit the 50,000 stream.
Wow, it's always interesting when someone develops a path based on their own situation, right? And you probably didn't think it would unfold in the way that it did. But it's quite amazing that I think that you went through this yourself, and it makes it more real and I think tangible for those of us that want to deal with you in terms of your understanding and understanding how we're actually being impacted.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I found that people were starting to ask me lots of questions about sleep, and I took that pathway. I have a background as a registered nurse, have worked with neonates and of course, in other areas, but decided that sleep was my passion and decided to train in that area.
In terms of children's sleep, talking about like developmental differences, like how does sleep needs differ between infants, toddlers, and school-aged children, and even adolescents? Like, is there a different needs in terms of these age groups?
The real only difference is that the sleep architecture is different in infants to older babies. So what that means is that younger babies in those first few months, they have a different sleep pattern. So they don't spend a lot of time in deep sleep. They spend a lot of time in light sleep, and they have lots of short sleep cycles. And that's why they wake frequently. They need to develop some sleep biology to be able to sleep like us, like, an adult. And that sleep biology develops at around 6 months, between 4 and 6 months.
And given the show is all about healthy habits, I think, we can dive into that early. Like, what are some effective strategies for parents to establish good sleep habits in their children?
Yeah, I love this question. It's a great one. What we know, and certainly what some huge studies show, that in those first couple of months becoming a new parent, it's tough, and your baby has all that changing sleep pattern, that they're not producing melatonin in those first few months. They're not responsive to having a dark, dim room. But what we know is that when you are attentive to their sleep needs, and that might mean you pick them up, you give them a cuddle, you help them calm down, you feed them to sleep, all those things absolutely help them sleep better. But there's going to be a but here. Really, between 2 and 4 months is when lots of parents start to see sleep change dramatically. And why that happens is because by the time your baby gets up into that phase of development, they've learnt those behaviours of needing you to help them go to sleep. And that's why we see parents struggling with what we call contact sleeping. So the child needs a parent to be beside them. They need to be rocked to sleep. They need to be fed to sleep. And over the process of that year or years, that contact development can progressively become worse.
There seems to be this kind of raging debate in philosophy, particularly among new aged parents, around like how much do we allow the child to cry? How much contact do they need? Oh my God, are we creating trauma? And are they going to need counseling when they're 30 because we didn't hug them or we're close? Like, what's your view? Like, if you were to speak generally, like, is it better to get them independent faster, or like how do you answer that question, I suppose?
Absolutely. Sleep is crucial not only for the child, but for the parent's well-being. And when you've got a child not sleeping, it affects the whole family. Certainly, we know that there is absolutely no validation for intervention of sleep, that it's harmful. There's no validated evidence. It hasn't been found. And unfortunately, it always takes a few people to look at maybe one or two studies, which is not validation, and studies that are often poorly done that'll say, oh, you're ruining your baby's brain, or you're causing trauma. No, you're causing trauma, more family trauma, by not intervening.
I think it also doesn't help that we're in the age of anxious parenting. Like, you would have seen parents, and I guess just the evolution of parenting over the last few years. Would you say that context has shifted the way that parents look at sleep, and are a little bit more paranoid about maybe harming their children, more paranoid than they should be?
What we do know is, since the lockdown with COVID, there's a lot more anxiety in the household. So children are more anxious, and that's been a global phenomenon. And, most parents are really wanting to protect their child from anxiety, provide a lot more contact with them, which is great. But sometimes that overlaps into the parent not being in control anymore. So the child is actually leading everything in the home.
I tend to, when I step back and think, like, we've been having issues with our son who's 7, and it's kind of then flowed on to our daughter. But I found, and I was talking to my wife about this, like, given the opportunity, the children will absolutely monopolize your time. And if you don't create the guardrails, like, they will literally be on top of you nonstop.
That is so true, and it's something I often say to the parents that I see, that remember, you are in control. You are in charge.
So what are the most common sleep issues or disorders like you encounter in children, and like what are like some of the approaches that you find most successful in addressing them?
The number one sleep issue across all ages, I work with all ages from babies to adults, but this may surprise a lot of parents, is insomnia. So all ages of children can have insomnia. They meet a diagnostic criterion, which is an international criterion that makes a diagnosis. So for parents, that might be a child that has sleep onset insomnia, so taking 20 minutes or more to fall asleep. That might mean a child that won't go to sleep unless there's a parent next to them. Frequent waking during the night, again, needing a parent to help them go back to sleep. For some children, it's waking too early to start their day, anytime from 4:30 in the morning. all of those things meet the criterion of insomnia if they're happening at least 3 times a week.
When you mentioned the word insomnia yesterday, I realized that I had probably not defined the word appropriately. Like you know what I mean? I think we tend to think insomnia is this adult phenomenon of like you're awake for days and you can't sleep and you're tearing your hair out. But like the way that you had framed it was much more nuanced than I think what I had understood of the actual phenomena.
And, insomnia can go on for years. Unfortunately, a lot of parents are misguided by well-meaning people out there, social media, etc., that, sleep will just fix itself. You don't need to do anything. It will just fix itself. But we know that that is, in so many cases, is not what happens.
In terms of development for children, like how does sleep or lack of impact a child's cognitive and emotional development?
Yeah, again, there's been some really big studies around this, longitudinal studies where they've watched children from, that preschool age right through to primary school level. And certainly they show that children that don't get adequate sleep are affected cognitively, and they don't seem to catch up at this point. So that means their level of being able to communicate well, have a good functioning memory, and we all need that, otherwise we don't learn well. Concentration, behaviour, all of those things are affected. So it's absolutely imperative that children are getting the sleep that they need.
What are the key elements that you've seen that are conducive to good sleep in terms of environment for children?
Depending on where, I always ask a parent, where do you want your child to sleep? That's the number one. If they want them to sleep in their own room and at the present they're sleeping with a parent, then we need to set up the room to make it conducive to good sleep. And how a room should look is that, first of all, darkness is imperative. As mentioned before, babies, by the time they're 6 months, they've developed all the ability to be able to sleep well. They're producing melatonin. They are able to respond to what we call sleep pressure. And what sleep pressure means is that when you wake up after sleep, you can't go back to sleep. Your body doesn't let you go back to sleep. You need to have time to build up sleep pressure again. Where our bodies also respond to circadian rhythm, so we become entrained to circadian rhythm of being awake in the daytime and sleeping at nighttime. And how that happens every day is that when the sun comes up, it warms the external environment because the sun produces heat, and that affects our core body temperature. And when our core body temperature rises and the light, in response to light, it stops producing melatonin and we wake up. And the reverse happens in the evening. When the sun goes down, it changes the external environmental temperature. That affects our core body temperature. Combined with the dimness of light, we produce melatonin, we go to sleep. So taking that back to how a bedroom should look for a child, it's really important to have a dark room, really, not just a child, but for everybody. You don't want sunlight coming into your room unless you want to respond to that bright light first thing in the morning. And sometimes you may not want to respond to that. Sometimes you need to be able to sleep in and catch up on sleep. So when you don't have good coverings, good blackout on your windows, you're not controlling the sunlight coming in. And again, relating that back to room temperature, many people sleep in rooms that are just way too hot. And when your body can't cool down, that will mean that you can't fall asleep. And you'll be woken during the night because you're too hot.
Deb, just speaking personally, like I've found the greatest challenge to us as a family is the ecosystem of sleep in that our kids prefer colder rooms. I prefer moderate temperature. My wife, has daily fluctuates and the other phenomena is my wife is a night owl. I'm an early sleeper, so I go to sleep. So last night, what happened was, we're all sleeping. She's up till 11, comes to bed. And then me and my son, we wake up. And then I'm angry, right? Because then it's that time around like 11:30 because I find if I wake up early, when I fall asleep, like if I fall asleep at 10, and then I wake up at like 11, it's actually hard to go back to sleep. I find and the problem is she'll generally come into bed. So it's just this whole family ecosystem of sleep is really challenging. Do you know what I mean? Like, do you have anything on that?
Can I ask, do you guys sleep under one doona cover or one blanket?
Yeah, and I know where you're going with this. We do the pulling of the blanket and that movement of the blanket. I don't tend to find is much of an issue. I tend to find I'm a very light sleeper. I'm kind of always aware of the alarm clock. Weirdly, like I'll wake up 2 or 3 times checking my 5 a.m. start, right? And kind of then coupled with just that habit now from the kids, it's not great, right? So I just find the whole ecosystem of sleep in our house with everyone's different rhythms it just makes it hard to really have a good night's sleep generally. Do you know what I mean?
And it's probably because of that impact of your child. I hear many parents say that they're not sleeping well. I mean, not just the fact that the child wakes them up, but even if they have good nights or the child's away, the parents don't sleep well and you get used to not sleeping well. To answer your question, to avoid that disturbance, if your chronotypes are different, so, one parent's a night owl, the other parent's an early bird, the Scandinavians, they sleep under separate doonas so that you can creep into bed without waking that other person. At that hour, if you've only been asleep an hour, you're still in light sleep phase. You may not have even got into deep sleep. And deep sleep only happens in the first part of the night. Well, the majority of deep sleep is in the first part of the night. So, yeah, I think that improving, first of all, your child will help you to get into better sleep because at the moment you're strongly affected by those rhythms of your kid.
And Deb, like it's funny you mentioned the Scandinavian. So right now I'm like in a real deep dive in regards to researching their patterns of like ways of operating during winter. Like for us, we live in the Dandenong Ranges in Melbourne. It's beautiful, but it's dark and cold and wet. We've been in New South Wales for years, and the vitamin D deficiency. I train a lot, so I'm up very early, and I'm a kind of a type A person, and just understanding how the weather and learning to be okay with the way that I feel my body is changing and changes during winter circadian rhythms. I feel heavy. I feel like I have to use more willpower to kind of move my body. Maybe we can touch a little bit about that. Like how does seasonality impact fatigue and sleep and what should we expect and be okay with during real winter?
It's lack of daylight stimulus that causes that problem with your sleep. So it can alter your circadian rhythm. Certainly, people do describe lack of daylight hours or strong daylight affects their mood, makes them feel more sad, makes them feel sad, basically. The sad disorder and can make them feel quite depressed. What we say to anybody, and this goes across all ages, exposure to outside light is essential. So by outside light, it's at least 1,000 lux in strength, and a room light is way below that. Around, sorry, I just took a note on this because I always forget these figures, but room light's around 300 to 500 lux. So when people say, oh, they get up and they turn on all the lights, well, no, it's really not strong enough. So that early morning light exposure is fantastic. And, because so many of us are on screens and inside on screens, that means that, we're not getting as much outside light as we really need because that outside light helps to keep our sleep on track. It assists our circadian rhythm to go to sleep at the time that suits our chronotype. And it helps to consolidate night sleep, so less waking.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent segue, Deb, into grown-ups and adults. And talking about sleep patterns, like how do sleep patterns typically change as adults age? And like, are there adjustments that they should make to maintain good sleep health?
Basically, the sleep health is the same across the lifespan. The only thing is that our sleep hours change. So after the age of 64, 65, we don't need as much sleep. So that's when you see like many adults thinking they need a lot of sleep as they age. Well, no, you don't need as much sleep.
In terms of working, I think you touched on it before, sitting at a computer, being at a computer, and other lifestyle factors. Like, how does the modern work environment and just lifestyle choices in terms of health and in eating, like how do, when you eat, what you eat, how do these impact sleep, if at all?
Well, certainly we know that having spicy foods and large meals close to sleep time, so within those few hours of sleep, can definitely affect your sleep because you have that heaviness in your gut. When you're going to sleep, all your systems go to sleep basically as well. Everything slows down. So you can imagine if you've got a large meal in your stomach or spicy meal in your stomach, it's just going to sit there and not digest. So that can lead to reflux, so that feeling of acid coming up into your esophagus, which is going to disturb your sleep. Also, we know that many people drink way too much coffee or may have way too much caffeine because if you're not sleeping well, that's what helps you, feel that lift, that little bit of energy. But coffee takes 4 to 6 hours for its half life to leave your body. So that means every cumulative intake of caffeine over the course of the day can mean at night time you've got loads of caffeine in your system.
In terms of the content as well, like I think, eating lots of chocolate or eating kind of sugary food, or like, sometimes I make a mistake of sneaking in a treat, like a couple cookies, and I'm just laying there like I can't sleep. I'm like, you know what I mean? Like we really have to be conscious of it, don't we?
You do, yeah. You actually need to experiment with your own sleep and, pay attention to what affects your sleep. And I've certainly done that as a sleep practitioner. I rarely drink alcohol because alcohol disturbs my sleep. It disturbs everybody's sleep. Alcohol does help you fall asleep easier. You have that kind of, sedative effect. But then in the second part of the sleep of the night, the sleep cycle changes. So it affects you by waking you up and interfering with your REM sleep, which is our dream sleep. And that's absolutely crucial for our mood, stabilizing our mood and our mental health. Sleep is everything to me. I work in sleep, so I need to practice good habits. So I would rarely drink alcohol. Another thing that I changed was coffee because coffee gives me reflux. And sometimes coffee or chocolate or certain foods, if you pay attention to what you eat over the course of the day, if you have those symptoms of reflux, which many adults do, then you should look at changing your habits because, if you don't change your habits, you're going to have to resort to medication. And, do you really want to go down that pathway? I don't.
We had a guest about a year ago. She wrote a book called "Take a Nap, Change Your Life." A researcher out of the U.S. is a really good book. I don't know if you read it, but like I was going through this phase as an ultra runner. I run really long, particularly those days, really long distances. So I might have run 30 kilometers by like 8 in the morning, 7 in the morning, go to work, and then by 10:30, I'm just wrecked. And I found like I was trying to experiment with like recharge. So I try to take a 22-minute nap or 20-minute nap. What's your opinions about naps and stuff like that in terms of reinvigoration?
Naps are proven to be pretty helpful with helping you gain a little bit of energy when you're lacking it. One of the things, though, that you have to look at nap from the perspective of sleep pressure. So if your nap's more than 15 or 20 minutes long and you get into a deep sleep, you knock off your sleep pressure, which means that when you go to sleep that night, you may have trouble. You may develop some sleep onset insomnia, so you can't fall asleep. And that happens for kids as well. As a parent, you will know that if your kids have a late nap in the afternoon, then they're not easy to get down at night time. And that's because you've knocked off their sleep pressure and they're not just ready to go to sleep at that same time.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, the challenge for me on the nap was that I would nap in like one of the offices, and being a light sleeper, like it would be hard to nap. What I actually found works for me really well in terms of like lifting that, that fog, that kind of onset sometimes like around 2 o'clock. It's just like the mental fog and fatigue and lack of clarity. I found going in the shower and getting cold water hitting the back of my neck, it like my head and neck, it like instantly lifts. Even my eyes turn white. It's quite bizarre. And someone was telling me that it's kind of like a reset to the nervous system. I don't know what it actually is happening from a technical perspective, but yeah, it's just been amazing. And I found that more consistent than obviously trying to nap. And you may nap, you may not.
Well, that dip that you describe in the afternoon, typically for early birds, that early afternoon feeling of drowsiness, it relates to your circadian rhythm. So it has a natural dip around that time. For night owls, that natural dip happens later, more towards maybe a later afternoon, early dinner time, and then they feel like they've got all their energy back, and that's why they can stay up later. But certainly for sleep inertia, that feeling of even if you have a nap and you wake up feeling groggy, or you're finding you're struggling with that natural circadian dip, bright light is absolutely the go-to. And perhaps for you, that shower relates more to the fact that it's lowering your core body temperature.
It's bizarre, Deb. It like instantly lifts me out because I struggle, and part of it is my internal resistance to feeling tired. I struggle with the lack of control. I don't know what's going on for me psychologically, but when I feel that drowsiness, I have a real problem with it. And part of my journey has been trying to get okay with it and say, well, that's just where my body's at. The challenge is when I'm, 2 or 3 in the afternoon, particularly on a weekend, and I'm tired and getting drowsy, the kids' energies peak. Uh, It's like, so I'm trying to sit on the couch and they're running around, jumping on top of me, and I'm just pissed off, right? Like, I'm like, just let me sit. Can you get off me, right? So like, so I think I'm preaching to the converted here.
I think if you give yourself a break and realize that that's a normal circadian dip and just go with it, okay? Of course, sometimes we can't have that luxury of sleeping on the couch or sitting on the couch for a bit of downtime when that happens. But certainly if you can get outside and go for a brisk walk, so that combination too of outside light and activity is a game changer.
I've also found a tricky balance of like when I'm in that funk, sometimes I'll run or I'll exercise, and it's tricky to know when it's actually counterproductive, because I know I'll get that second wind, but then part of me is like, should I actually be resting?
Because you've got some sleeping problems within the household, you're not looking at a kind of normal situation. You're tired anyway. If you need that afternoon nap to help you get through the day, then that 15 or 20-minute nap is definitely going to provide you with a bit more energy and help you cope. But fundamentally, it comes down to solving the problems that are going on with nighttime sleep.
In terms of sleep disorders, like what are some of the extreme sleep disorders that people develop as adults?
So again, insomnia is the largest sleep problem that is experienced by adults. In addition to that is what we call apnea, sleep apnea. So that's a whole different ballgame, but that involves waking up in lots of micro wake ups during the night because you stop breathing. So you have those mini episodes of not breathing, which is extremely bad for your health. Of course, the lack of sleep is bad for your health too. But some people will have that combination. So that means that, they try to do the right thing. Perhaps they're on a sleep machine to help them with their sleep apnea. But because they've got insomnia as well, they blame the machine for being no good. And they stop using that. So definitely those two conditions can exist side by side.
Does sleep apnea have a correlation with being overweight?
Yes, it does. So sleeping on your back, having more tissue around your neck means that the airway collapses, and that means the intake of air is reduced. So often for people, if they're not sure whether they have sleep apnea, they might find that and their partners may tell them that they suddenly wake up with a big snorting sound. So as they gasp for air, that's one of the telltale signs. Another thing that is different between those with sleep apnea and insomnia is during the day, insomniacs rarely feel tired. They're exhausted from lack of sleep, but they really feel sleepy. They can't sleep during the day. Whereas someone with sleep apnea will quite easily nod off, maybe, sitting on the bus or wherever they're inactive with that rhythm of a motor. If they sit down in front of the TV, they'll nod off to sleep.
That's interesting. You touched on health. Like, what's the role of sleep and mental health, particularly with adults?
We know that there is a strong correlation between anxiety and depression. What we know, it used to always be the thinking that the mental health problem caused the sleep problem, but now we're seeing that that's not necessarily the case and often isn't the case, that the sleep problem leads to the mental health problem. And, if, and this is a great thing that there are some doctors out there that are now treating mental health disorders by, first of all, getting sleep sorted out rather than just going straight to medication.
I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, and we talk about a lot of the alcoholism being really an illness of perception, right? Like alcoholics wildly misperceive things. We find that's really increased with lack of sleep. So a lot of times people will come and tell me about their 50 million problems, and I'll be like, go to bed. Tomorrow will probably be gone. It's crazy how we start to perceive things with lack of sleep, like paranoia. I tend to put myself at the center of more things and think it's all about me. And what did that really mean? It's a real crazy phenomenon, isn't it?
It really is. Lack of sleep just changes everything. It changes everything related to your mental health, your relationships, your family, your own well-being, and not to mention your physical health, because we know that lack of sleep means that there's increased chances of cancer, diabetes. These are major health problems that can be predominantly avoided if you're getting adequate sleep. Sleep is still, even though it's flooded in the market, we're all hearing about sleep. People are still unmotivated to actually get their sleep sorted, and they just think, "Oh, that's the way it is. I've had it for years. I've tried everything." Well, most of the time they haven't tried everything. They've tried what Google, and unfortunately, a lot of people out there that are, we look up to our doctors, etc., don't have good training in sleep.
Yeah, look, I'll be honest with you. We find doctors are like good for band-aids and surgery, but like we've had interesting situations with my daughter's diet, and we've had to go to naturopaths. We had to go to people that were more nuanced in their training because we just found the medical is very much what's the blood test say? Okay, if it's not traditional, they have no idea.
Yeah, I tend to think that, people should go to specialists if they've got problems, and not just go to one, go to others, because we know that there's usually a solution out there.
In terms of special like groups of people, like pregnant women, shift workers, Deb, like what are some of the things that obviously takes more skill to probably navigate? Like how maybe for pregnant women it's just survival, but like are there certain things she could do and shift workers like how do they ensure like they're probably working maybe particularly if they're working at night and sleeping during the day, how does sleep, I guess, training and strategies differ?
Well, let's take them separately because they're pretty different. For pregnant women, they are going to experience this, particularly in that last trimester, alterations to their sleep. And it's likely because of that hormonal factor. And also the fact that their body is changing and comfort is a lot more difficult. So, really important that you have a good mattress. If your mattress is more than 10 years old, you really need to get that mattress changed because the position of your body when you're pregnant is different. And any uneven sleeping will affect your hips, and then you'll get hip pain, back pain, and that'll affect your sleep. When you're pregnant, if you've got the opportunity to have a rest, to have that nap in the daytime, take advantage of that. Of course, that can be different if that's, not your first baby, but really important to pay attention to your sleep because in that last trimester, your sleep's different, and then you go on and you have a baby and your sleep's different again. So it can be many, many months before you get back to having good sleep. You really need to take care of yourself.
Just with that, is there a connection between lack of sleep and like postnatal depression and issues like that?
Absolutely is. So postnatal depression doesn't necessarily happen in those first months. It can happen in the second year of your baby's life. If you've had chronic sleep problems all that time, that's often when it hits. So everything then falls apart. Your whole world falls apart when you develop PND. But let's go back to shift workers because, many people are out there that work shift work. One of the things that I say to people, if you're planning on shift work or perhaps you work in shift work, is your chronotype suitable for you to do that shift work? So, for instance, if you're a night owl, shift work's going to be your ideal work job, okay? Because you like to stay up at night. You don't like to get up early, so you can sleep in the next morning. When you go to sleep, it suits your lifestyle. But if you're an early morning type, an early a morning owl, you're going to really struggle with night shift because at night time you don't want to be going to work. You want to be going to bed. But of course, in our world, we don't always get what we want. And after night shift, one of the things that can help you is to finish your shift and go home wearing glasses, so sunglasses, so that you're avoiding bright light because bright light's going to wake you up. And when you go to sleep, say that was your last night shift, when you go to sleep, it's better to have a shorter sleep and then even a catch-up nap in the afternoon and then go to bed later that night. So if you finish night shift and you think you're going to go back to falling into a normal 10, 10:30, 11 o'clock sleep, it's not going to happen because your chronotype shifts. And when you get back to that normal rhythm, the chronotype can only shift around 30 minutes a day. So it's not going to happen to you you're not going to sleep the same the next night after you finish your shift. It's going to take a few days.
Can people's chronotypes change? Because I feel like I was a night owl, and then when I started running, particularly competitively, I shifted to a morning person, and then actually realized I liked it because I just got more stuff done, and I like the kind of quietness of the morning. Like, can have you found people can alter their type?
You can't really change your chronotype, but there are adjustments that happen. So you'll find that for older people, maybe they were a night owl, they'll start to feel sleepier earlier in the day rather than being a night owl. So yes, they can alter, but what I always say to people, because many people are not sure of their chronotype, they think they know it, but when I tease it out a bit, I'll say, well, actually, I don't think that's your chronotype. And why people often go wrong with this is because when you hit the adolescent years, your sleep patterns change. So you develop more of a delayed sleep process, which means you can't fall asleep at the normal time that you were falling asleep, and you go to bed later. And sometimes that delayed sleep can go into early adult years. So that can kind of give you that false feeling of, yes, I'm a night owl, when in fact, as you've discovered, you prefer the early morning. So maybe that really is your chronotype is what you've said it is, but you've been misled by the adolescent shift in sleep.
And I think a lot of the night owlness was formed when had less responsibility as well. Like, I just feel like as kids come into the picture, you just got to optimize your ways of operating, right? Because you don't necessarily own your time, so you just got to figure it out. But I do find I'm in a really good mood in the morning generally, and then I start to fade out and get grumpy in the evening.
Yeah. Another guide too is your creativity. So if you feel like you're more creative in the morning, you're a morning type. And if you feel like rush of creativity happens more in the evening, then it's likely you're a night owl.
Deb, shifting to more of a personal lens, like what about your work do you find the most rewarding? Like what do you love about your work? Do you prefer kids, adults? Do you love it all?
I really love working with all ages. That ability to be able to give somebody a complete change of lifestyle and feeling once they've learnt how to sleep, and everyone can learn how to sleep, is just so rewarding. It's, the immense gratitude people have, which is not, I'm not giving myself a big head or anything, but it's just so lovely to influence people in that way so that they can get the best out of their lives and be healthy. From my nursing background, what I see is so many people abusing their bodies at younger ages or, into adulthood. And what I see is, maybe in 20 years' time, you're going to have a condition that's purely been related to your lifestyle and could have been avoided. And, everybody needs to take notice of, what they're doing with their bodies. because you don't want to be one of those older people that, maybe dies prematurely, maybe misses out on seeing their children and their grandchildren grow. You need to step up and take responsibility.
Yeah, it's such good advice. So, in terms of advice for people, particularly with habits, like say, I'm looking at developing better habits to improve my sleep, or I'm thinking that maybe something's off with my kids and this isn't normal. Because sometimes, to your point, I think because everyone's going through sleep issues that have kids, we tend to think, oh, look, it's normal, but like maybe it's not. Like, what's your top recommendation for someone, or recommendations for someone that's actually looking to improve, whether it's their own sleep or the kind of ecosystem of their family? Like, where do they start?
I think the biggest message that to take home here is, if you've tried lots of things and you're not getting anywhere, you need to step up and get professional. You need to be motivated first of all, but you need to get professional intervention, because if nothing's working, and we all start off with all those lovely sleep hygiene things. The adults that I see, most of them are not drinking coffee. They've given up coffee, or they maybe have one morning coffee and they don't have any more. Many of them have given up alcohol. Many of them, sleep in a dark room. They control the temperature. They're doing all the right things. So if you get to that point and you're doing all the right things and you're still not sleeping, then there isn't, you need to have some therapy, because there's no point in staying stuck in that world of sleeplessness. And I say the same thing for parents, because they're often advised that just wait, it'll work itself out. Well, if you've tried lots of things and it hasn't worked itself out, you'd be amazed how quickly, sleep can change. People that have had decades of sleep, or children that have had years of sleep, and I see kids that have never slept, they're now 9 and 10 years old and they've still never had a full night's sleep. That is such a long time of being deprived of sleep. And yet sleep can be turned around in 4 to 6 weeks, sometimes in many cases in younger children in 1 week. So why would you not intervene and make your family healthier?
Yeah, we're gonna definitely start that journey with you, Deb. For those people that are actually looking to get in contact with you, where can they learn more about you and your work?
I offer anyone that's interested in having a chat with me a free sleep chat, no expense to you. I'm passionate about talking about your sleep. And they can go to nigh.com and book in a free sleep chat. I'm really happy to, spend as much time chatting to people about how they can sleep better.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Deb. Really appreciate you. It was really insightful, and I know the community's going to get a lot out of it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, RJ.
Thank you for tuning into the Ultra Growth Podcast. We hope you've gained valuable insights and inspiration from today's episode